You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, I'm Maureen Bogey.
And I'm Dylan Hackworth.
And you are listening to the Creep Street Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are overjoyed to have you here with us. If you would like to support the show, please follow us on Instagram at Creep Street Podcast.
That's
at
right.
On Twitter at Creep Street Pod. Head on over to Facebook, a 5-star review, a subscribe, a like, a rating, whatever you could do helps us so much. We also have a Patreon. And speaking of our Patreon, Dylan, will you please list off our top tier Patreon elite donors?
That's right. Of course, the Dream, James Watkins. The Finnish Face, Via Lundqvist. The Madman, Marcus Hall. The Vivacious, Vicky McHugh. The Tenacious, Teresa Hackworth. The Heartbreak Kid, Chris Hackworth. The Oh So Suave, Sean Richardson. The British Bonebreaker, Bex Martin. The Notorious, Nicholas Barker. The Terrifying, Taylor Lashmet. The Count of Cool, Cameron Corliss. And the Archduke of Attitude, Adam Archer.
Ooh, baby, that feels good to hear, feels good to say, and it feels good to know. Thank you so much to our Patreon donors. If you're interested in joining them for some extra Creep Street content, head on over to that good old patreon.com with a slash, and then you say Creep Street Podcast, and there you have it. Now that we have that all out of the way, Dylan, please, can you set the table? Can you set the scene? Can you let us know what we're kind of hopping into today? Because I'm gonna be honest, folks, I don't know much about this one. I'm gonna be learning along with everybody.
Well, we realized we had not yet done a Canadian story.
Which is just a mistake, and we're sorry.
Mistake, because there's so many good ones. And
today
we are going north of the border, way, way, way north of the border, all the way up to northern Canada.
Way up there. We're talking Santa Claus territory, okay? Or maybe not quite Santa Claus territory, but you might see him, around.
Today we are talking about Lake Anjikuni and the village that vanished. Now, this is a freaky-ass story.
I'm just taken aback by that wonderful, wonderful alliteration you set up for us there. The village that vanished.
That's right. Well,
You don't get a double V often, but when
I
you
know,
do, it feels
right?
good. It feels good.
It does feel good. Let's see. Let me list my sources. Article entitled Village of the Dead, the Anjikuni Mystery at MysteriousUniverse.com. The Vanishing Village of Anjikuni Lake by Brian Dunning at Skeptoid.com. A Strange Tale of the Lost Village of Anjikuni Lake by Les Hewitt at Paranorms.com. And Village of the Dead, Lake Anjikuni Mystery Disappearances at TheUnexplainedMysteries.com.
Wow.
Very excited to be doing our first Canadian story.
Me too, and this is just very appropriate for the time right now. These long January nights.
That's right. Up
it's
here.
It's cold, it's gray, it's, it's a mysterious dark time.
Yes, especially, for our listeners listening in the Northern Hemisphere, particularly
Right.
the upper part of the Northern Hemisphere where it is quite cold right now. This, we thought, is a perfect story. This is one you'd want to bundle around the fire to.
Oh, that's right.
Because this is a freaky story about a very cold place.
If you have the ability to light a fire, whether that be in a fireplace, whether that be a candle,
or under your ass.
Or under your ass. But what I'm trying to say is no matter what you're doing, we need you to buckle in, okay? Because this is a fun one.
So I'm going to start off by just sort of painting you a picture of the location. So where exactly is Anjikuni Lake? Well, that is way, way up in the northern territories of Canada, specifically in the Kivalliq region of rural Nunavut.
Okay.
Tucked right by the Kazan River, the spot was ideal for fishing. In fact, an Inuit tribe had taken up residence right along this lake, and they were very prosperous. So this was a very small community that had grown on to essentially be a thriving, like, small town, which is something we'll circle back to in the end.
Okay.
And they lived, living off the land and giving back to the land around them, primarily through fishing and hunting and kayak making. They were very well known for their kayak making.
Oh, cool.
And this village was doing so well that it became a popular rest stop for hunters, fishers, explorers, and the tribe was also very famous for their hospitality.
Okay, yeah, this sounds like fun.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah.
They'd offer travelers a bed for the night as well as food and supplies. And on occasion, one of their visitors was none other than one Joe LaBelle, famous Canadian fur trapper.
Oh, okay. Trap that fur, baby.
So he had developed quite a rapport with the folks at this village.
Okay.
And so he would often stop by before either heading out or heading back in from some sort of an expedition.
Okay.
Like a truck stop.
Yeah, that's what I'm liking this. This kind of sounds like maybe it's like a pilot coming to you this fall on CBS.
Yeah.
I'm kind of getting a Cheers vibe, but also you can spend the night.
Now this is where our story begins.
Okay.
On a frigid day, on November 12th, 1930. The time was roughly between 9:30 and 10:15 a.m. So Joe LaBelle, as we know, Canadian fur trapper, he's trudging through heaps of snow on his way to visit the village at Anjikuni Lake.
Right.
And he's looking forward to this, a much-needed pit stop.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah. Gotta rest your feet, warm up.
So when he finally sees it in the distance, it's like a sight for sore eyes. Finally, some rest and friendly atmosphere.
Oh, I love it.
But as he approached, the only sound he could hear was just the crunch of the snow under his boots and the whisper of the icy wind across the tundra. This was the first sign that caused LaBelle a little bit of concern. You see, he'd frequently visited this village, and he knew that as any traveler approached, the dogs of the village would bark like crazy to alert the community.
Oh, yeah, okay.
No dogs were barking.
That's a bad sign. That's bad. No. This sucks.
Now, the only sound LaBelle could hear on this November morning, like I said, as he approached, was the crunch of his own footsteps and the occasional whisper of the wind.
Damn. That's haunting.
Now remember, LaBelle is a fur trapper. He understands danger as well as human and animal threats. There was something about this silence that was very unnerving. For further perspective here, in some of my sources, and we will get to this at the end because it's hotly debated how exactly big this village was. It could have been as small as 30 people. It could have been as big as 2,500 people. The idea that it was to 2,500 people, very unlikely.
Yeah, that
most
seems
likely,
yeah.
Most likely it was under 100, probably 30, if not just a little bit more.
But, you said this was in the morning. This wasn't like super early in the morning.
Right.
Even if there weren't that many people there,
someone would be up.
There would be enough noise that he would maybe be able to hear something happening, or even if he couldn't quite hear exactly what was happening, he could just kind of like hear white noise. Not white noise, but like, I don't know, get some kind of alert or sign
and you'd think
that
someone
there is someone there. Or those dogs, like you said, or the dogs. Like, where are the dogs?
And you would think between 9:30 a.m. 10:15 a.m. someone would be up by then. Someone in this group would be up. And on top of that, the dogs would be barking like crazy.
Right.
So when LaBelle finally entered the village, he found it vacant. Both people and animals completely gone.
So no one is there at all.
LaBelle, his heart drops a little bit. He's walking through and there's no one there.
And this is a place he's been so many times before, and there's no way that everyone would just
be gone.
There's no explanation.
But that's when LaBelle heard a noise. A soft but familiar noise. It was the sound of a crackling fire. He looked over to see a pot, a cauldron like a pot you would bake food in, sitting on top of a fire. Slowly he approached the pot, and the stew inside had been left there long enough that the stew inside had charred, so it had been clearly just abandoned there on the fire. However, it hadn't been there long enough that the fire would have burned.
Exactly. I was just gonna say that. Like, yes, it would take a long time to really fully char something like that, like a soup or a stew, but it wouldn't take so long that it's like, but the fire was still going.
Exactly.
So people hadn't been there or hadn't been tending to that stew for, a while, but it's not like that it had been days or anything like that.
Exactly. So LaBelle is just standing there like, what the hell is going on?
Because what the hell is going on?
Slowly, he walks to one of the houses, one of the huts in the village, and he pokes his head inside. No one's home.
Fuck.
He then just goes door to door, poking his head in. No one there. And of course, occasionally calling out, hello,
Right, yeah. What? Wow.
Every home in the village is deserted. And here's what makes it even weirder. Things such as food and clothes hadn't been taken. The houses were still filled with everything. Even stranger still, their rifles, which were prized items to this community, had just been left on the ground. And empty kayaks line the shores, getting beaten up in the weather, which is something they wouldn't have done.
Right.
These things were essential to their livelihood.
There was no, right, so nothing was packed, nothing was tended to. It's almost as if everything just dropped at where it was.
One of the sources specifically says that LaBelle entered into a specific house, to find a moldy caribou stew.
Oh,
on a pot that it was still cooking inside one of the homes.
But that one was already moldy.
And nearby, a child's hand-mended seal skin coat was laying on the ground. The bone used to needle the thread was still in it, as if someone had literally dropped it mid-stitch.
Wow, okay, this is really reminding me of The Leftovers.
And to top it all off, other than LaBelle's snow boots, there were no tracks whatsoever in or around the village.
Wow. Well, I'm just so confused in certain ways, because sometimes I feel, well, yeah, it makes sense that there wouldn't be tracks because, some of that soup or stew was moldy.
Right.
And, making it seem like, yeah, maybe some snow had fallen. Like,
right.
There's enough time for snow to fall. But then, the fire's still going.
The fire's still burning.
I mean, I can't imagine a fire out in the open like that could go on for more than, 12 hours?
I don't know.
I guess it just depends on how big this friggin' bonfire was.
So LaBelle has no idea what's going on, but for whatever reason, he just knew he couldn't stay there.
Oh, absolutely not. Get out of there.
Something didn't feel right. And once again, we need to really consider this. Stopping at this village to rest and refuel was something LaBelle had factored into his trip.
Right. He was like, I need to do this.
Leaving means he would not be resting and wouldn't be getting supplies. It was risky to try and take that journey to go get help. So LaBelle, with all of his knowledge, his survival skills,
right,
just knew he didn't want to stay in this village that had houses with food and clothing inside.
He was like, I can't do this. He is literally living within HBO programming.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a wild kind of almost more apocalypse type where it's like, where did these people just go all of a sudden? But it's interesting that deep down he had a feeling. He's like, something is really not right here. Right. Worth the risk to not be there.
Now, there was one last place to check, however, and that was a cement block fish storehouse that was located a few miles out of the village. Now, just an FYI here for everybody, this following portion about the fish storehouse, I only was able to find it in a few sources. Many don't include it, so just for the sake of thoroughness, I'm going to include it.
Oh, yeah.
So the story goes in some of these sources. LaBelle then made that trek to the fish house. It was operated by a 68-year-old man named Fran McKenzie. Now, McKenzie was a retired military man. He couldn't get around well because of arthritis and an auto accident he had sustained while in the military.
Oh, no.
So if anyone was going to be at home, it was going to be him because he can't get far.
Right.
Between his physical condition and the environment, he couldn't get far.
Just makes sense.
The storehouse had come to be known by the nickname the Mac Shack, given the name Mackenzie, of course.
Okay, hilarious
name. It was a place frequented by both trappers, hunters, and the native people in the area.
And teens looking to make out.
Now, LaBelle's hopes were dashed when he arrived at the Mac Shack to find it deserted. The place appeared to have been ransacked, with bottles and glasses smashed on the floor.
Oh, no.
All the wooden chairs where patrons would sit were gone. Mackenzie, of course, was gone, but LaBelle found his wood and whalebone crutch laying in pieces by the open door of the shanty. So LaBelle ventured back into what would have been Mackenzie's private living quarters.
Mm-hmm.
And underneath his pillow on his bed, he found his diary. And it was open to the date just before that day, so the day before. Yet there was no entry written in it. Now, the diary was filled with mostly what you'd expect, the daily comings and goings of the business, incoming, outgoing stock, memos, etc., and there was even mention of a fist fight Mackenzie had gotten into trying to collect a debt.
Oh, damn. Okay. Intense.
But in the weeks leading up to the event in question, there were these occasional mentions of strange lights in the sky.
Strange lights in the sky?
Yes. Now, LaBelle has seen enough. He takes off.
Yeah, well, because this time, clearly this feels more like there was an attack at this one.
Right.
These people were kidnapped or murdered.
Right. So he takes off, and the sources estimate it was about 20 to 25 miles in sub-zero temperatures, mind you, to the nearest telegraph office.
Wow, okay, that is how bad he was like, no.
So LaBelle fights his way there. Apparently he's exhausted, even a little bit frostbit. He lets them know, and within minutes, they've sent out an alert to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And within a few hours, the Mounties arrived at the telegraph office where LaBelle was, and he relayed to them the story. Now,
okay, the horses are here. The horses came.
That's
the
right.
Horses have arrived.
Now, according to a 1984 book, The World's Greatest UFO Mysteries, along the way to Anjikuni Village, it said the Mounties stopped after they had talked to LaBelle, and they're on the way to the village.
Right.
It said the Mounties stopped to rest at a shanty that was home to a trapper named Armand Laurent and his two sons.
Oh, wow.
While they were resting up, the Mounties explained to the three men that they were headed to the village at Lake Anjikuni in response to this report.
Right, yeah.
Naturally, the Mounties asked the men if they had seen anything weird in the area in the last few days. And wouldn't you know it, they did.
Yikes.
Just a few days before, Laurent and his sons claimed they saw a strange gleaming object zipping through the sky. And they described it as sort of cylindrical shaped, and that it sort of morphed into like a bullet shape thing, which we've seen before, like the Tic Tac UFO that's real popular right now, that the one that's been on like New York Times and stuff, the one off the Nimitz, I think. Is that what it was? I'm mixing them up. I'm sorry to UFO if I'm mixing up cases.
But no, that's interesting. The same kind of shape that has been mentioned a lot with UFOs. That is very weird.
Right. And of course, they said it seemed to be headed in the direction of Anjikuni Village.
Damn.
Now, right away, when the Mounties arrived in the village, they were able to confirm a lot of LaBelle's story. In fact, they discovered some other strange things that LaBelle had missed.
Okay, what did these horses find?
Now, just for the sake of clarity, none of the sources were in agreement about what the officers found when they actually came to the village cemetery. Some say that all of the graves had been opened. Some say only a few. Some say only one. But the point is, at least one grave had been opened. To make it even weirder, the officers reported that the ground around the graves, which clearly this is November in the northern it's rock solid.
Yeah, it would take a lot.
The officers reported that the ground around the graves was frozen, as you'd expect. Yet it was as if the graves themselves had almost been thawed.
That's great. That must have taken a long time.
Another thing to point out is that these graves, it was a tradition, they would place these stacks of rocks on either side of the grave. These rocks were undisturbed, meaning it must have been a human or something intelligent.
Right.
If it was just an animal digging up, or something.
Like an animal was somehow able to dig through all the frozen ground.
Whatever did this had a delicate hand in terms of, it didn't disturb the rocks.
That is so weird.
And the officers also noted a strange blue light in the sky. Not like a moving thing like a spacecraft.
Okay.
You see, up there, it was very common to see the Aurora Borealis, the Northern Lights.
I was going to say, it was this...
And it was kind of like that, except it was blue. The only way they described it was in that nature, but it wasn't that. Is the best they could.
Just kind of like but I have heard of things like that where it's like just a blue light in the sky, kind of like a luminous.
Right.
I have heard of that before in other paranormal accounts. I don't know what it means.
Right.
It is kind of odd.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
That's when they noticed the sled dogs.
Oh, fuck.
About 300 feet from the village. Depending on the source, I've seen some that said LaBelle found them when he first got there, and some that was when the Mounties found them later. And depending on the source, it was anywhere from 2 to 7 of them.
Oh, no.
But regardless, either 2 to 7 sled dogs were found dead. Later, pathologists would be able to determine that the sled dogs had all died of starvation. Now let's think about that. As we all know, LaBelle had visited this place before.
Also,
maybe.
why would they even do that? Like, there's...
Which they would not. They would not. That's the other point.
Oh,
they
of
wouldn't.
course.
Right.
But that's why. But I'm also... Yeah, I know that's what you're saying, but it's just like, there's also no real motive for them to even do that. Like, that
would be suicide.
They need those dogs.
Absolutely. It would be suicide to do this.
So it's like, there's no real point to that happening.
Also, the other thing is someone was there to start a fire.
Right, that's what's weird. It's like someone was there recently enough for the fire to still be going.
And there's also, the houses are loaded with food, too.
Right, and it's not like the whole place has been ransacked by other animals, other wild animals, which I don't know if that would happen. I'm not sure, but that is something to think about. I would think that if it had been just abandoned for, months, that animals would have gotten into things, but I could be wrong. I don't know.
The case was eventually closed, and it was determined by the Mounties that the people of the village had been gone roughly 8 weeks, which doesn't explain the fire and shit, of course.
Yeah, weird.
And they never had an answer for what actually happened to them, or where did they go.
Weird.
So, theories.
Yeah, okay, here we go.
Of course, that it's a hoax.
We gotta talk about it.
Of course, the main theory, it could be a hoax. Let's talk about this.
Yeah.
The idea that this village was 2,000 to 2,500 people, highly unlikely.
Right, yeah.
It's more likely that it was the original 30 in the original article, which we will get to because this is interesting.
Okay, so it's really thinking it's at the bottom of it. It's not just somewhere in the middle. It's like, no, like more towards 30.
I'd think like, maybe 150 at the most. I would personally think, but yeah.
So it's really, they were really stretching it.
Also, as far north as this place is, I guess some experts have said that there wouldn't be a place that size. It'd be more like an outpost. It wouldn't be like a settlement.
Yeah, because that is, 2,500 people. That's a lot.
Now, the story had long been dismissed as a hoax, believing that it was journalist Frank Edwards who made up the story for his 1959 book, Stranger Than Science. And it's in this book, one of his sources he lists is from an article in a newspaper called the Danville Bee, which is still in existence today. It's called like the Danville Register or something, but it's in Danville, Virginia.
Okay.
And this article was written by one Emmett Kelleher. This article was presumed to have never existed because no one could find it.
Oh.
And so everyone assumed it was made up by Frank Edwards. That was until the original article was discovered, and you can actually find it online, the Danville Bee. Then the question ultimately is this Emmett Kelleher, this article he wrote for the Danville Bee.
Okay.
There's a picture that went with it. There is no photos of this village.
Okay.
It was found out that the photo they used in this article in the Danville Bee was from some other place. So then that also helped people. It fueled the fires of this was made up.
Because they're like, oh, it's not even the real photo. So it's really easy to brush that off. But the thing is, it's with that stuff too, it's not like they were trying to trick you with that photo. It's like they just were like, we don't have the actual photo. This photo gives you the same idea of what this type of place would look like.
Absolutely.
But I understand why people immediately are like, no, I'm being tricked.
Right.
This whole thing is made up.
Right.
I get, we advise to not be that way, but I get it.
But obviously, like I said, it was always dismissed that Frank Edwards had created this for his book when that actual source was found. So that story did not start with Frank Edwards, essentially.
Okay.
A common theory among UFO enthusiasts.
Oh, okay, I like this.
Is that the entire village fell victim to a mass alien abduction.
I mean, it kind of seems like it, doesn't it, though?
I mean, the basis for this story comes largely from the Lawrence mention of the craft that they saw, that cylindrical bullet-shaped thing. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the blue lights that the officers reported seeing in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it's one of those things. It's like, okay, sure. It would explain those certain weird things, but obviously, there's no way.
I mean, there's no proof, obviously.
Right.
But it is interesting kind of thinking about the grave situation, that they were able, that makes sense that maybe some sort of alien technology or beam or whatever would be able to thaw out, a straight line, like a precise area, disturb that grave, but without disturbing much of the outside of it. So like you said, nothing is proven, but it is kind of, it's an interesting theory.
Absolutely.
An interesting theory.
And another theory is that the village fell victim to a Tornrark.
A what?
A Tornrark. From what I've gathered online, it is a demonic creature from Inuit lore.
Oh, damn.
One of my main sources described it as a sort of sky demon who is in charge of an army of evil spirits.
Oh, Whoa.
And apparently this theory was believed by LaBelle himself.
What?
According to the legend, the Tornrark is invisible to everyone except Inuit shamans.
Oh my god, this is incredible.
This is very much like the Skinwalker thing. Very spooky stuff.
Wow.
This is very cool stuff.
Wow, okay, so it's only visible to the shamans. Damn, okay.
Now, they would recite incantations and even conduct animal sacrifices to keep these evil spirits at bay. Now, the theory...
Oh, I'm following, baby.
Well, according to the legend, these evil spirits can take the form of animals such as bears or wolves. So here's the theory. Is it possible that the people of that village had believed their dogs to be these evil spirits in disguise?
Oh, no. Oh.
Would that have explained the forced starvation? Because
Okay.
obviously, as we know, this was not a thing they did. They did not...
What, like this would, they would never do
their
this.
sled dogs are... No, not at all. Like, this is they would never have done
But then-
something like that. Like, that's what's so weird.
But the thing is, no, I'm with you, but my question is, then where did they go? If, like
Right.
they starved the dogs, presumably that worked.
Right.
And then where did they go? Or it didn't work, and where did they go? It still kind of leaves those questions.
The way in which these things vary, these stories vary, not all of this can be true.
Okay, yeah.
Like, for example, in some sources it says those dogs they found were buried under 12 feet of snow.
Oh.
Which, who's gonna...
12 feet of snow.
12 feet of snow. Why would you even know to dig in that area if they're buried 12...
It's just
who
very
knows?
weird.
I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying there's a lot... The sources get wild in how much they vary.
And this is what we've talked about this with in lots of different episodes in the past, like Amityville. This has come up most recently, but just because some things aren't real or can't be true doesn't mean that there are some of those nuggets of
Right.
gold in
Right.
there. You really kind of can piece together what is true, and no matter what, it's bizarre.
Right. Another theory, believe it or not, is that the village fell prey to vampires.
Okay, now I'm listening. Now I'm intrigued. Now my ears have perked.
I will say this is probably, of all of them, the weakest. Obviously, you'd say, well, hey, there's no bloodshed, no signs of a struggle.
Yeah.
How could it be vampires?
Well, because they sucked up all the blood.
Well, yeah.
Their
Well, and that's the
mouths.
thing. I'm just saying, this is a theory sometimes people throw around because sometimes it can go long stretches of dark up there. Did
Oh,
something
yeah,
that's...
yeah.
This is, like I said, this is the loosest of theories,
But sometimes those are the good ones.
in terms of theories, this to me is the most interesting. And it's the one that comes up a lot. Did they slip into another dimension?
Wow. Okay. I was not expecting that, but that's very interesting and could explain a lot of the same things.
And the source actually lists instances of individual people who people have claimed vanished literally before their eyes. Like they literally were looking at them almost like it was a time slip, or they slipped through like a curtain.
This is like The Leftovers.
Because it would explain, it would lend itself to why then does the story itself sort of get erased? Like, is that why there's not a big paper trail about this story? Why?
Right.
Also, like I said, in these sources, it gets weird. There's some that say later the Canadian government went and bulldozed the town to hide it so that it was as if it never existed, like it was a UFO thing. As you would expect, there's 1,000,001 of those sorts of theories.
Totally, yeah.
1,000,001 of those.
This is one of those stories where there are 1,000,000 different details that you can hear from different places. But I do think, though, that maybe the original group of people either left or were taken or were attacked, or I don't know what happened. But then maybe a little bit later, someone came and made a fire and tried to make some food, and then something happened, and then they had to leave quickly, and maybe it snowed, and that's why there was no footprints or something. So maybe it wasn't like all of the people living in this area had left immediately, like just so recently that a fire was still going. Maybe someone had come later to do that.
Well, and part of me
don't
wondered,
know.
maybe there was another guy like Joe LaBelle, just an innocent guy, who stopped through because he knew the place and was like, what the hell? But maybe stuck around long enough to make himself a little food.
Decided like I need to rest and I need to eat.
But then where would his tracks go, though? That's the problem.
Maybe because it snowed?
I mean, unless it came, because we don't know how long between that fire was lit and when
it was long
LaBelle
enough for
showed
something
up.
to burn, so maybe he had... that's the thing. I don't know how, like, deep these tracks were, where if it was just a dusting would be enough to
Right.
cover someone's tracks, or if you really would need a full-blown blizz.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know. This is one of those. There are other stories that I've heard of that are similar to this, and we'll have to come back to that. Kind of like what you said too, just stories in general of a slip, a time slip,
Yeah.
or different dimensions, or things like that.
All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for Lake Anjikuni, the village that vanished.
Thank you so much for doing all that research, Dylan. This is a fun, weird-ass story, and what a blast. We want to do more Canadian stories,
yeah.
though. This was just our first little step up north to Canada.
Absolutely.
And if you have any other Canadian stories, legends, serial killers, cults, whatever, please let us know, and we'd love to do that.
That's right. And if you want to support this show, go to patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast. Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth,
I'm Maureen Bogey.
and this is Creep Street. Good night and goodbye.